Leadership is action, not position. True leaders don't create followers. They create more leaders. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for selecting the third workshop of the Black Doctoral Network's Fall Workshop Series. I am Dr. Nieta Scott Dunmore, a proud member of the Black Doctoral Network and a workshop committee member. This dynamic and premier organization provides so many educational venues to assist graduate students, doctoral students, and postdoctoral individuals, emphasizing that Black scholars matter. A few events that we provide are workshop series, networking nights, fireside chats, webinars, podcasts, faculty recruitment fairs, doctoral and graduate student meet and greets, a Western Regional Conference that is held in the spring, and of course, our upcoming virtual National Black Doctoral Network Conference, which will be held October the 28th through 30th, 2021. You can find all about us on all social media platforms. As in any organization, membership has its privileges. So please consider joining this dynamic organization. A little bit of housekeeping. Questions and comments will be put in the chat. I will monitor them and also help the co-host out with that. Notice the link for the survey for this workshop. I'll post that in the chat too as well. Remember to keep yourselves muted unless you're talking with the co-presenters as they plan to go through the presentation. The subject is Black Excellence in Practice, Trusting the Leadership Process today. We have Dr. Tempest Adams, who is an award-winning educator, workshop facilitator, and professional speaker. She has over 10 years of teaching and leadership experience across grades 6 through 12, community college, and university levels. She has a BS in Marketing Education and Business from North Carolina State University, an MBA from Pfeiffer University, and a PhD in Curriculum and Instruction, Urban Education from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Our next co-presenter is Dr. Willie Jones. He's a leadership development professional with over a decade of experience in designing and delivering high impact and engaging learning solutions. He has a BS in Teacher Education, Business Teacher Education and Marketing from North Carolina State University, an MS in Adult and Continuing Education from North Carolina A&T University, and a PhD in Leadership Studies from North Carolina A&T University. This dynamic tag team in leadership and development, sprinkled with organizational effectiveness, curriculum design, facilitation, and talent management, is one that we all are so pleased to have with us today, and we're looking forward to hearing from them. Dr. Jones will be our first co-presenter and will be followed by Dr. Adams. Dr. Jones, thank you for being with us today.
The pleasure is all mine, and thank you for the warm welcome. The introduction makes me feel so good about myself. I mean, it sounded really good. Greatly appreciate it. Dr. Adams and I are extremely happy to have just an opportunity to bend your ear for a few minutes and really talk about leadership. So we have a slide deck that we're going to share, and we don't want it to be death by PowerPoint, but rather what we want to focus on is just making sure that you're able to have some visual aspects to support what it is that we are discussing. But we are planning for this to be extremely engaging. And we do want you to come off mute at points and times and talk to us, as well as leverage the chat to talk to us as well. So Dr. Adams, if you want to go ahead and pull up the slide deck, the first thing that I really have for you all is really just kind of a question. And a lot of times, if you're like me or you're like myself, the first thing that I'm thinking about is, why am I here? What is the purpose of today? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? So if you could, in the chat, just talk to us briefly as to, why are you here today? What is it that you're hoping to get out of this particular session? That way, we like to really kind of begin with the end in mind. So once we know what you all would hope to get, it'll help us to really tailor our message. So if you want to use the chat and tell us what you're hoping to get out today, we would greatly appreciate it. And I do have that teacher wait time in me, so I'm gonna wait until I see a couple responses. This is gonna be hopefully somewhat interactive. Otherwise, I will ask individuals to just come off it and speak to me and tell me what you hope to get out of today's session.
Hi, good morning. This is Kenya Ramey. I thank you for saying we can come off of mute. I prefer them typing all day, all the time, as you're probably aware of. So thank you for that. But I am here today as not only as a doctoral student, but also as someone who just transitioned into a national programming director role for a teacher advocacy and policy position here in Washington, D.C. And so just wanting to navigate best practices, transitioning into this role, of course, as you know, while finishing out and working on my dissertation, but really understanding and wanting to gain best practices as a leader, and more specifically as a Black woman leader in this role as well. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you, Kenya. I appreciate you being that brave first volunteer. And then I see we have in the chat, Tanya says to gain more insight about engaging talent in this new pandemic normal world. Awesome. Definitely appreciate you all just sharing what you're hoping to get out of it. And for Dr. Adams and myself, really our focal point today is to really highlight what leadership is, to give you some best practices out as to how you can be more effective as leaders. Specifically speaking, we're going to focus in on three things. What leadership is, this concept of everyday leadership. You see behind me, I have this book that we wrote called Trust the Process, a 5-step model to becoming an everyday leader. What Dr. Adams and I did was we conducted some research, we combined our shared living experiences, and we condensed leadership down to 5 simple steps. We wanted to follow the model. If you've ever heard of the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I facilitated in the corporate sector and was mesmerized as to how leaders would take hold to what to me was such simple concepts. And what we sought out to do was to create simple concepts for leadership. We've all heard the terminology of leadership, but when it comes to defining it and putting it into practice, it's a little bit more convoluted. So the first, or the next question rather, that I want to ask you all is leadership defined. What is your definition of leadership? Feel free to either leverage the chat, which Doreen, I see your message as well as to what you're looking for. Feel free to leverage the chat and tell us what leadership is to you, or as Kenya said, we type all day. If you want to come off mute, talk to us. I know it takes time to type as well as to think, so I'll give you all a moment. Dr. Adams, I don't think anybody knows what leadership is or has a definition of it, which makes our job so much more important. Dr. Adams, why don't you go to the next slide and talk to us a little bit about a definition as to what it is. And I see Tanya did come off and say, positively impacting people, performance, and productivity. Thank you, Tanya, for typing that as well.
So here on this slide, we have our definition, the way in which we articulate it. We actually approach defining leadership in the book by saying that it really is one of those words where people kind of know what it means, but sometimes they might find it difficult to articulate a definition and put it into words, right? And so for us, we really focus on it being a process and it being outcome based. Definition for us is about influence. That's good or bad. It's still leadership, right? And so for us, we really want folks to be mindful of being everyday leaders where they own their inherent capability to influence not only themselves, but everyone around them. Of course, we want you to have good influence, but we also want to be mindful that that influence can be both direct or indirect. Anything to add to that, Dr. Jones?
No, I think you're spot on, Dr. Adams. So as we look at what leadership is and how to operationalize leadership, based on research, based on data, based on what we've seen in the work that we do, Dr. Adams as a professor who trains leaders in the classroom, myself as an individual who operates in the private sector working with corporate leaders, we've boiled down leadership to 5 things we believe if you do these day in and day out, you will immediately increase your leadership capabilities, your influence, and ability to really have an impact on the teams that you lead. You'll see the first step that we have is to be present, followed by setting clear expectations, inspecting what you expect, making reflection a routine, and then committing to personal development. We're going to go through each one of these 5 steps one by one. We're going to do it very high level because we do want to leave some room for questions at the end. And at the same time, we want to give you an opportunity to process. But Dr. Adams is going to kick us off with this first step of be present.
So in order to do that, thank you, Dr. Jones. I want you all to take a minute to look at this image and tell us what you see. Of course, you can do this via chat or you can take yourself off mute. But what do you see here? And what do you think this is representing?
A lot of processing going on, Dr. Adams. Looks like we had one comment come in from Andre. Andre, I want to come off mute and talk to us about perception. What made you say perception, Andre?
Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Andre Crenshaw. It's kind of early in California, which is why I haven't said anything. But again, it looks at your outlook on life and your perception of and what you're filtering and taking in terms of what is occupying your mind and where you're able to. The dog is obviously able to filter out the noise, whereas the human is taking it all in. And a walk in the park may not be as relaxing to that individual as it is to the dog because it's their perception of on an outlook on what they're taking in.
Hey, I love that. Go ahead, Dr. Adams.
I was just gonna say, I think we've covered step 1 with Dr. Crenshaw's help there. So that's exactly what it is, right? It's all about perspective. Are you mindful or mindful, right? So when we talk about our first step of being present, we really recognize that we all have competing priorities. We have tons of things to do as it relates to our work responsibilities, our family responsibilities, taking care of ourselves, health responsibilities, you name it, right? We could go on and on and on with all of the things that we have to be mindful of. But it's important that in our leadership roles that we are mindful and that we're allowing ourselves to be present as we're working with our teams, whatever spaces we are occupying that we identify as leadership roles, which is honestly majority of the spaces that we occupy if we think about that everyday leadership concept. But being present really helps you focus on what needs to be done at that time. Dr. Jones knows that this is actually my personal weakness when it comes to our model, because I'm typically the person that has a lot going on, but I'm not as effective if I don't allow myself to be present in the moment, utilize active listening skills when I'm working with folks. This even applies to my personal relationships, right? So really think about your perspective and how you can clear your plate as much as possible to be present in the moment when you're working with your peers, or even, again, dealing with other areas in your life as it relates to everyday leadership. Dr. Jones, anything to add to being present?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Adams. And for me, with this one, as we go through each one of the 5 steps, what Dr. Adams and I would encourage you to do is to think about where you land and where you could potentially increase your capabilities. When I read and hear be present, Dr. Adams and I had a long conversation about this one. And I shared a story with her where, I was working with one of my leaders, and she was a senior manager, and we were going over this concept of be present. And she told a story that just kind of always stays in my brain now when I think about be present. She said that she went into a leader with one of the senior officers of her company. This was a chief financial officer. And it was a meeting that it had taken months to get on his calendar. And she only had 30 minutes. And while she was meeting with him, within about the first 5 minutes, his phone started ringing. And naturally, she's thinking, chief financial officer, phone's ringing, you need to take this call. So she said to him, go, feel free to go ahead and take the call. And he looked her dead in her eyes and said, in this moment, there's nothing more important than what you have to say to me. He said, my administrative assistant knows that if it's an emergency, she knows how to get in contact with me. In this moment, I'm present and here for you. And I think about how I show up for my friends, my family members, my colleagues, and I know there's opportunities where I can improve to be present. I mean, if we think about even this conversation, Dr. Adams and I have been talking to you for about 19 minutes. I guarantee at some point we've probably lost you, we've lost your attention, and that's just the nature of how we show up as humans. So when we think about the first step of the model, being present, for us, it's all about removing the distractions, trying to take the perspective of a canine, so to speak, where we are locked in on the moment, the task at hand, and then watch how that greatly impacts the individuals we serve, as well as the teams, and helps us to build relationships. But that's all that I would add, Dr. Adams. Anything else before we jump to the next step?
No, thank you so much for sharing that story. I think that's one that we'll all be able to take with us leaving today.
My pleasure. Well, then, you're still here, Dr. Adams. Go ahead.
Yep. So we just wanted to kind of highlight a quote here. And this is modeled from the book that we tried to, again, take kind of famous quotes to reiterate the point. And this one says, awareness is like the sun. When it shines on things, they are transformed. And so really think about where your awareness lies and what you're giving your attention to, remembering to always be present.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Adams. So the next step of this model, keeping in mind for us, what we want you to do is to lock in on at least one of these steps that when you leave here today, you say, okay, I can be more intentional about being present, or I can do a better job of setting clear expectations. Whatever it is, pick one that you feel as though you can improve on. So this next step that we have, setting clear expectations. I'm gonna let you all read this quick little cartoon where in white is Dilbert, who's the employee, and then his spectacular boss is in the gray jacket wearing the blue tie. So give everyone a moment to read it. All right, hopefully everybody's not slow readers like me. It takes me a long time to get through things like this. Using the chat or come off mute, talk to us about what this means to you. Have you ever worked with a leader that operates in this manner? Anything that comes to mind.
sad to say, this is more the norm that I have seen when it comes to leadership.
Agreed. Tell me a little bit more, Tanya, because I think you're spot on, but talk to me about what makes you say that that's the norm.
So, and I've worked in leadership development previously, and a lot of times when there are some challenge or, oh, they're, the person's not performing. I have leaders come to me and say they're not performing, or, and one of the first things I do is I say, and help me understand how you have laid out what success looks like for you. When have you had that conversation? And I usually, the eyes glaze over and they're like, well, they should just know. Why should they just know?
Yeah, I could not agree more, Tanya. You hit the nail on the head. Anybody that would want to affirm what Tanya said, share their own experience or anything that comes to mind. And thank you again, Tanya. I saw Kenya come off mute. Go ahead, Kenya.
Yes, I will say that because I have experienced that, right? It literally inquiring like the what? We did not speak on that objective or that expectation. And so in going, I committed to myself moving forward to inquire, like in my initial conversations, what are your expectations? What are you expecting of me, but not saying, like wanting to kind of navigating those types of questions in our initial conversation so that I can become familiar with their leadership style and to see what they're thinking and or not saying. So that one of the ways I've navigated this, setting clear expectations, is inquiring on my end, like, what is it that you're wanting me to do or expecting of me, but you're not 100% sure or clear on saying, to avoid this level of confusion, because I have experienced that in the past.
Awesome. Thank you again for coming off mute as well, Kenya. And you're both spot on with this. And this is something when Dr. Adams and I were talking, we said we have to include something about the importance of setting clear expectations. And what we did was we kind of even broke this out to 5 things as leaders we can do in order to ensure that we're taking ownership of these situations. And I see Tanya has something, let me read it. I started asking interviewers when I applied for jobs, what does success look like? And can you give me more specific examples? I love it, Tanya. What we're going to share here, you can use it whether you are the leader or if you're the individual who's being led. And what we broke it down to for setting clear expectations are 5 C's. And these 5 C's are candor, calibration, clarification, collaboration, and then consolidation. So I'll kind of walk you through what each one of those 5 look like with respect to setting clear expectations. First is going to be the candor. When you have instructions or an assignment assigned to you and you know there's unspoken objectives and you know it's not clear, be candid with the individual to say, let me challenge this and ask you for some clarity. Let me ask for some specifics. Let me ask what success looks like so that we're not just running around hoping we hit the target and we don't even know what the objective is. So we ask you to be candid, the first C. The second one is then calibration. Once you've been candid, you have an opportunity where you can reach back to the individual and say, okay, let me make sure I heard you correctly. So what you're asking for is A, B, and C. And then you get to have a little bit of dialogue, which leads to the next C of clarification. Then the leader will be in a mode where they're clarifying what they meant, and those unspoken objectives will be coming to the forefront. From there, what we suggest is collaboration, where it's not a one-way street. It's not them versus you. It's an us type mentality. How do we collaborate on a path forward? And then lastly, we propose that you consolidate. And by consolidating, it's again at the end saying, just to be clear, what I've heard you say is we need to do ABC and we need to do it by 1, 2, 3. To give an example of where I've leveraged this framework, I had a leader who I reported to, absolutely love this leader, still talk to her today. She came to my wedding, invited me to hers. We're close. We still eat lunch, BFFs. But when it came to clear expectations, she would drive me crazy because she wouldn't give me clear expectations. And the reason for this was, from her perspective, I was one of her top performers. So if she gave me a task, she knew it would get done. And this is what would happen. She would say, Willie, I just need you to get this done. Get it to me whenever. And I would come back to her and say, okay, we're sitting in the month of September. When you say whenever, are you referring to December 31st? This was me being candid, seeking some clarity. She would say, no, Willie, December 31st is not going to work. I need it sooner than then. I'd go back and say, okay, well, let's calibrate. If December 31st doesn't work, help me understand, are we looking at October? And then she would come back and clarify and say, okay, Willie, what I mean is I need this prior to my next meeting. I would say, okay, well, let's collaborate. Let's talk about when your next meeting is, what my calendar looks like, and what's a timeline that we can both agree on. And then she would say, all right, so I just need this maybe 3 weeks from now. And I would say, okay, I can do 3 weeks. So if I consolidate what I've heard from you, it's not whenever, because December 31st doesn't work, but you need this within the next 3 weeks. And that would be how I would lead up, knowing, or manage up, knowing that I had leaders who were well-intentioned, but not always clear. And you can use these same 5 C's of candor, calibration, clarification, collaboration, and consolidation when it comes to leading up or leading down. These are outlined in our book through story format, which is why we don't have it on the slide here, but definitely feel free to reach out to us with more. The next slide we just have really talks about, again, the quote of a poor sailor blames the wind. We don't want you to be in a situation where you're blaming other people, regardless of how incompetent they might be. We want you to take ownership as an everyday leader. Definitely appreciate all of the comments as well as the conversation thus far. Next up, we have the third step in the model, which is to inspect what you expect. And with this one, what we like to say is, as leaders, you can't set clear expectations, but then never inspect them. So we have an image here, and what I want you all to do is to, again, come off chat, or excuse me, come off mute, or speak into the chat and tell us what you see with these particular images. What do you think we're trying to convey? Again, take a second, look at the image, either come off mute or talk to us in the chat. What do you think we're saying here with inspect what you expect? No problem, Kenya, I figured. But a lot of bystanders here. Nobody with any thoughts at this point. Check as to if your outcome is forming to be what you want. I like that. Thank you, doctor. Spot on. Anybody else?
Oh, this might be too much for me here.
Make sure expectations are realistic and relevant. Yeah, and I'll greatly appreciate that as well. With this inspect what you expect, and I'll start by just looking at the image. And thank you, Andre, for sharing in the chat as well. One of the things that we want you to be mindful of here is, once you've set clear expectations, it's going to be important that you inspect what you expect, because there's a quote, what gets measured gets done. But we want you to be extremely intentional in how you do this process. If you look at the individual on the right, kind of looks like a micromanager, kind of looks like they're standing over your shoulders, making sure that you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. We've all felt what it feels like to be micromanaged, and it has a negative impact on the relationship that we have. Whereas if you look on the left, the individual is still watching to make sure things are done correctly, but they're not over your shoulder. They're empowering you to make decisions. They're giving you the autonomy and the freedom in order to be able to do what needs to get done. One of the things that we say with this inspect what you expect is extend trust. Allow individuals to know that you trust them, you're giving them the authority to do what needs to be done, but you're not leaving them out to dry. One of the things that we talk about a lot in the leadership spaces is what's called seagull management, where if you think about a seagull that flies in and just poops and then leaves. If you think about that from the perspective of a leader, very similar, where the leader swoops in, drops off a whole bunch of work, and then leaves. And then you're left there with this mess, trying to figure out how to clean it up and how to get it done. What we're saying with inspect what you expect is be there for individuals, make sure you're setting them up for success, but at the same time, do not micromanage them. Because the next quote that we have, which I've already alluded to, simply says, what gets measured gets done. So it's a simple reminder that in order to be an everyday leader, you need to make sure that you are measuring the process of what you're trying to accomplish. Dr. Adams?
We are moving forward in the model. Thank you, Dr. Jones, for going over setting clear expectations and inspecting what you expect. We're gonna turn this inward a little bit for step 4, being all about reflection and making reflection a routine. And so as you've noticed, the kind of trend in our presentation style here is to have images. And so we'll take a moment to kind of stop and assess what you think this represents, how it's speaking to you. So again, you can take yourself off mute or share in the chat, but we'll give you a second to think here.
What was the question, please?
Sure, I can repeat that. Tell us a little bit about what you think this image might represent. So to make everybody feel a little bit better, I had to share this with Dr. Jones when we were, looking at images and choosing images, that chess is not my thing. And so I was immediately intimidated by the image. So I had to have a conversation with him. He's good at chess. My husband's good at chess. I tried to learn. It's not happening for me. So when we think about it, obviously we see the pawn is looking in the mirror itself representing the need for reflection. The pawn is looking in the mirror, is not exactly seeing what he is, but maybe what he would aspire to be. Maybe it could kind of represent confidence. And so what you can take from that is that be confident in the need to reflect and focus on the need to look in the mirror, for lack of a better word. And so in our book, we have a model for reflection, and it's recite. And so I'll take a moment to go over the model, kind of similar to Dr. Jones going over those 5 leadership competencies, but recite. And again, I'll go through those by individual letter. So when you're thinking about reflection, first, you need to honor why reflection matters. And hopefully the model kind of spells that out for you a little bit. But the R is for recall. Take some time to just simply recall what happened. The E is for evaluate. So now I've made a list. Well, this is what happened. I need to move into a space where I'm starting to ask myself why it happened, how it happened. My favorite piece of this is the C, which is for celebrate, because I am notoriously guilty for thinking about all the things that went wrong and never really giving myself time and space to celebrate. Wait a minute, that turned out all right. You did a good job on that one. So remember the need to also celebrate in this process. We don't always want to harbor on what didn't quite go our way. I is for intentionality. Be intentional with your reflection. So think about what that looks like for you. For some people, it's journaling. For some people, it's quiet time in the car on the way home during the commute. Timeliness is another element of reflection. You don't want something to have happened at work on Tuesday and then you say, oh, I'll deal with it, or I think about it 2 weeks later. That might be a little late. For some people, it's in the moment right after it happens in their office, again, on their drive home. For other people, they have some time set aside at the end of the week. So you really should just think about what works for you in terms of making reflection a routine, and kind of where that fits and how that fits in your life. And then the last E in that model is for emphasizing. Again, this is just a mindset approach that you are going to emphasize the importance of reflection and knowing that it plays a critical role in moving forward and growing as an everyday leader. So there's a quote here that hopefully further emphasizes this, and it says, there is one art of which people should be masters, and that is the art of reflection. And really ask yourself, can I move to the next step, grow and develop if I don't spend some time to stop and think and reflect on what happened? There's another element that must be mentioned, I think is critically important, is that reflection is typically understood as like this solo work that we do by ourselves. But I think in our leadership spaces, it's equally important to invite other parties into that. So having some cooperative reflection would be helpful as well. We do this in our personal lives, in our relationships. We talk about what happened, what worked, what didn't work, and we use that as opportunity to get information to be able to move on or improve moving forward. So the same thing definitely applies in the workspace as well. Dr. Jones, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you covered it well, and you surprised me. You sounded like a chess player, Dr. Adams. So I have to let your husband, or Brandon Adams, know about that. So great job.
Thank you for the compliment. We're going to see if we can go back to the chess lessons without me getting frustrated. So we are coming to the end of the 5-step model here, and it is committing to continuous personal development. Tons of images on the slide here. It probably comes as no surprise that when we're thinking about developing as a leader, that we really need to focus on ourselves. I think at the onset, and I'm probably going to screw this up, that good leaders produce good leaders, right? And so thinking about the work that is necessary for you to improve and get better moving forward. In the book, we actually have some, it's kind of set up workbook style for you to be able to write some things out as you're working. So shameless plug for you to grab that so that you have some space to really dedicate to that. But one of the things that we really want to emphasize here is just being a leader of self. Before you can lead other people, you have to be a leader of self. And so take what you get from that reflection time, right, in that previous step, and do the work to develop and become a better leader. Think about your mission and vision statement. We use the analogy of a garden. Do you have any folks that have plants or have a garden and take care of them? Yeah, so I don't necessarily have a green thumb. I killed a snake plant, and those are supposed to be hard to kill. So if that tells you anything about me, then you know. But nevertheless, I understand enough about gardening and plant care that it takes work, right? And patience, and you really have to get your hands dirty a little bit. And so taking that analogy with you, thinking about personal development, that's kind of the last step in the model. We don't want to overlook it, but it's important that we recognize the role that we have to play in developing ourselves before we focus on developing outward. Dr. Jones, anything to add before we wrap up with this final step?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with that professional development piece.
Okay. So the quote on the screen there, those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. And that's what, to us, we think the personal and professional development is really about in this leadership model.
Awesome. So when we started out, we said that there were three things really we hoped you were able to get from the session, and one of which is just a clear definition on leadership. When I was in my PhD program, they had each one of us write our own definition of leadership. They had us do research as to what leadership definitions were out there. And Dr. Adams and I took a similar approach into coming up with this leadership definition for the book. We did some research, we combined lived experiences, and what we found was that essentially three things kept coming up. One was that leadership is a process. When you define it as a process, it's available to anyone and everyone who's willing to learn that process. The other thing is it's an intentional process. It's not something that just happens to you. You have to go out there and make it happen. And then lastly, when we think about leadership, at the end of the day, it's just influence. It's just taking the time to say that I'm going to influence someone else. Each one of us does it day in and day out. If you don't believe it, think about maybe the last time you went out to dinner, the last time you went out to lunch. You probably exerted some influence over whoever you went with. If they said McDonald's and you don't eat fast food, you probably had a little bit of influence on them. We're saying use this influence in real life, in the workspace, your professional life, in order to have an impact. When we think about this concept of everyday leadership, what we're saying is that each and every one of us has the ability to take ownership of our environment. I read a book and it kind of changed my life. One of the concepts of it was each and every one of us has the ability to create our own reality. And suffice that to say, we don't let things happen to us, we make things happen. So if you don't like your current circumstances, take ownership. If you have a supervisor or a leader who is not setting clear expectations, you take ownership to get clarity. And the way that we say that you can actually operationalize what it means to be a leader, 5 steps, 5 simple steps of be present, set clear expectations, inspect what you expect, make reflection a routine, and then commit to personal development. So if we look at the next slide, and we're almost at the end where we're going to get to the Q&A, we have a call to action. There's essentially one thing we want you to do is identify one behavior you would like to improve. So I'm going to ask you all to actually use the chat on this one. Tell me, is it that you want to be present? Do you want to set clearer expectations? Do you want to do a better job of inspecting what you expect? Is it making reflection a routine? Or is it going to be that you want to commit to personal development? But as you're thinking about each one, and thank you, Andre, for being the first to put his in, be present. I want everybody to just kind of drop in one behavior that you think perhaps you can stand to be better on. You heard Dr. Adams and I talk, and we wrote a book on it, but we still are challenged. When you think about be present, we still get challenged. Set clear expectations, we're still challenged. So I want to just look and see kind of what comes through the chat real quick. All right, so we got be present, taking time to reflect. Love it. Greatly appreciated. As the ones are continuing to come in through the chat, we also say, you know, each one, reach one, teach one. Take what you've learned back to your significant others, to your friends, to your family, to your colleagues. It's funny, when Dr. Adams and I were writing the book, we then started realizing that with our significant others, we're not always present. Think about the times when somebody's talking to you and you're caught up watching a TV show, or you have your cell phone out. It's different things that we can work on day in and day out. So I see a lot of good ones coming in. The last thing that we have as far as bullets is obviously a shameless plug. Go purchase the book. And the reason we say this, I have the attention span of a squirrel or a dog. So we wanted to write a book that was really short, really succinct, straight to the point. You can literally read this in one setting. On Audible, it's about 90 minutes in length. If you're a quick reader, you can probably read it in about 60 minutes or less. But what we did again was combine what we've seen to work, what research says, what data says about leadership, and giving you 5 practical steps for putting it into play. So that is what we have. Dr. Adams, anything you want to add before we open it up for a Q&A?
The only thing that I'll add is kind of going back to the sorry, I'm all over the place. Going back to the model with these 5 bullets, it's not really a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 kind of process. We put it together that way just for visualization purposes, but you might find yourself right now, I need to work on reflection, and then next month I need to work on being present. And so you might jump around the model. It's not really cyclical, but iterative, where you go where you need to go when you need to go there. So I just wanted to share that.
Perfect. And Dr. Nieta, I don't know if you were facilitate the Q&A or how this works, but please let us know. We're open for any questions that anyone might have.
Anybody who wants to come up and ask a question, that is fine. Please make sure that you do fill out the survey. But if you have any questions or comments at this time from either presenter, please come off of mute if you'd like to.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you. I think this is much needed. And I love your tenets with Trust the Process. They're simple, but impactful. So thank you.
Thank you as well, Tanya.
And likewise, this is Kenya Ramey. Just wanted to say thank you. I do appreciate the very simplistic 5-step model. I'm going to your website now. I'm an advocate of supporting, so I will purchase the book, but I do appreciate that it is very simplistic and readable for someone who was formerly a K through 12 educator as well, and working with educators. It's very much giving you those 5 key points will walk with me versus me trying to continuously dissect it. So thank you for making it simplistic and understandable, and I will utilize the information and follow up with you accordingly. Thank you.
Thanks, Kenya.
Hi, everyone. This is Doreen Hatcher. I'm also in California, so while I've been listening to the presentation, I've been trying to get kids ready for school and drop them off. So I really am grateful that I got up, well, not got up, but woke up early to listen to the presentation. I do have a question though. Considering how fascinating and wonderful and to the point this model is, how long did it take the 2 of you to call your information together and come up with not only I see Dr. Adams is laughing, not only the model, but to actually like put it in book form?
I'll let you take that, Dr. Jones.
Oh, yeah, great question. So I'll start by saying both of us had full-time jobs, and those were our primary focus along with our significant others. I'm gonna give you a long story short. So long story or short story, it probably, I would say maybe 1.5 years, but that's because we worked on it literally 1 day a week for 1 hour that day. So it was like 1 hour a week that we would kind of dedicate toward this. And, there were sometimes we would meet and the both of us would show up and say, this wasn't a week for it. We didn't get anything done. And we would just reconvene the next week. I think if we would have put more time and effort, we would have been faster, but we weren't in a huge rush, but we knew where we were trying to go. So we felt like this was the pace that would work for us. So long story short, I'd say about 1.5 years. Dr. Adams, is that accurate? Because I forget details. She's the detail-oriented individual.
No, it's accurate. And the only reason why I started laughing is because when you think about it, it felt like a long time. But once we got there, we was like, oh my God, we did this thing. And I laughed because we were actually on vacation. We were at a friend's wedding abroad as a group at dinner, and we just kind of came up with this thing that we've now kind of birthed, for lack of a better word. But yeah, definitely 1.5 years of just scheduling a routine. I think that's important for projects. Like, we were really intentional about having the next meeting on the books before we moved on. And so that's a point of advice that I offer to folks too. You have to make time, you have to carve out time and do so. And I think we did that bi-weekly for I mean, over the past year and a half, we still to this day meet bi-weekly to get our projects done.
Yeah, funny backstory. Then we'll get to your question, Latasha. Dr. Adams is married to my college roommate, so we were on a wedding vitra, and that's how it kind of started. I said, as Black PhDs, I said we have to connect and do something. It just makes too much sense for us not to. And when we got back to the States, we started the process, so to speak. But Latasha, I saw you had a question as well.
The doctoral network, but I'm so excited to be here. Dr. Jones, Dr. Adams. Wow, your book is something that I've been waiting on for a very long time, because a lot of things have seemed to be more difficult than they need to be. And I think that as graduate students, we need a simplistic process to follow. Instead of trying to chop down a big tree, we need to chop down little branches at a time. So I'm thankful to be able to purchase this book and support you all. And I look forward to growing a relationship with you all in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's funny. I've read some leadership books. They're like 350 pages. And then they say, read this again to get better context and understanding. And for me, I'm thinking I barely got through it the first time. You want me to pick it up again? It's just not how I'm wired and set up. So it was our pleasure, I think, Latasha.
Yeah, excellent job. This is Dr. Crenshaw. Excellent job. That's still early in California. I appreciate both of you and your brevity in terms of the impact of the information done in such a short period of time. And again, that's something that we should all take away, where we can bring the fruit without going through the orchard. So thank you both so much, and also for publishing. And congratulations on such an excellent job.
Thanks, Andre.
Are there any more comments or questions? For
I have
Dr.
a quick
Jones and Dr.
question.
Adams? Okay.
I have a question just very quickly. I would like to know what has been the perception or the way it's been received from in various different professional fields, whether it's corporate, we have secondary higher education, whether it's through nonprofit. What has been the perception of this very basic 5-step? Because we're all raving, of course, of having a very simplistic form, but what has been the perception from those, I'm assuming, who like the 500 plus pages and wanting to scaffold through a lot of information? What has the perception been in various different fields of professionals or different professional fields? Thank you.
You want to start, Dr. Adams?
Yes, if I could take myself off mute. I don't know where you were going to go in direction with the answer, but immediately her question made me think about the manufacturing professional, Fred, that we had a chance to work with. And so what I'm going to do is copy and paste just for the sake of time. I actually just grabbed this off of Amazon. And so Fred is a manufacturing professional, and he got his hands on our book. We've talked to him personally, and this was it reiterates what Dr. Jones shared there, that he's basically saying that it really doesn't take all that sometimes. And so that was a refreshing review that we got posted on the book. One of the things that, at least in my circles, once you get it, you'll see, you can maybe kind of hear a change of voice a little bit, because we're telling stories based on our experiences. And so for me in the education field, there is a lot of praise, but interest, I think, because the book uses a storytelling approach. We're not just saying do this and do this and do this. We tell stories from our lives that show how this model was implemented in an exemplary way. And so I think there is appreciation of a storytelling approach in a way that is relatable.
And I was attempting to share one that came from a military professional who I know. It's long, but it won't allow me to even put it in the chat. So I'll summarize it. Essentially, he said it's one of the best leadership books he's ever read. He's going to be sharing it with the board president of Air Force Academy. he wished he would have known this concept 20 years ago. So Dr. Adams, I know, was talking about a manufacturing professional. This was somebody from the military, from the corporate sector. I know I had a VP of our organization say that she was ordering this book for all of her direct reports. It's honestly only been out for about 2 months, so it's hard for us to give a full concept of what it looks like, but early stages, I mean, for us, I'd say we like the feedback that we received. Definitely encourage each one of you to, if you do purchase it, to please share with us your perspective. We love the good, the bad, and the ugly. So feel free to challenge and call us out on things that don't connect or make sense. But right now, I would say, I mean, we like how it's been received. And I was able to get it to chat, a copy in the chat, the one from the military professional. I guess my enter button was stuck.
Are there any more comments verbally or in the chat? We're about 1 minute away from 11 a.m. If not, I'd like to thank Dr. Jones and Dr. Adams for helping us to trust the process, or at least beginning to trust the process. And it's just been our packed, fulfilling workshop that we think that we all needed to hear, and about being present, setting expectations, inspect what you expect, make a reflection, a routine, and to commit to continuous personal development. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts at the Black Doctoral Network for taking the time to come to us and giving us that 5-step model in becoming an everyday leader. Thank you so very much. And we know that even though the book has just been out a few months, we know that it's going to be just big, just enormous. And we hope that we will pass that information on to other people that we know, our organizations and companies and affiliations of everywhere that we're affiliated with, so that they will also purchase the book and possibly have you come in too as guest speakers and presenters, because I know that we've all learned so very, very much today from everything that was said. And Dr. Jones, I think you wanted to say one more thing.
I was going to say exactly what you said. Just thank you to everyone for the time and the attention, but that was it.
Dr. Adams, do you have a final thought?
Ditto. We really appreciate you having us here today. This has been great, getting to talk with everyone. We put our links in the chat so we can connect via LinkedIn moving forward. So much success to everyone. Thank you.
And thank you so very much. And to everyone that has attended today, thank you again for being so attentive. Our 4th workshop is October the 5th at 6 o'clock p.m. It won't be so early this time. And it's on social justice activism in the academy and beyond in the age of Black Lives Matter. And just to wet your whistle a little bit further, the 5th workshop will be October the 12th, and it will again be a 10 a.m. meeting. And it is from schoolhouse to the publishing house, taking your writing to the next level. So as you can see, we do just so many things within the Black Doctoral Network. And remember, as I said in the very beginning, membership has its privileges. So please go to our platforms and think about joining with us in order to work with us, in order to even learn more as you are on your journey to be a Black scholar. Thank you again, everyone, and have a pleasant day.